All right, since after 6, we'll go ahead and call to order the monthly council meeting for June 8th, 2023. We'll begin with a moment of silence. Amen. All right, we need to get a motion to amend the agenda by adding a new business item. Number C will be to approve a sign permit request for Dizzy Bear. So Tom makes it. No? No. Oh, I'm sorry. Tallulah Adventure. Thank you. Getting my signs confused. So Tom makes that motion. Scott seconds. All in favor? Unanimous. All right, and then I need to get a motion to approve the agenda as amended. Scott makes the motion. Tom seconds. All in favor? Unanimous. Need to get a motion to approve the consent agenda. Craig makes the motion. Tom seconds. All in favor? Unanimous. And we will now hand this over to our guest, Miss Jolie Mixon, our accountant, or auditor, whatever,
Yes.
and let her do her thing.
Thank you. It's good to be with you all tonight. I know we're a little bit later coming out this year. We're usually here in February, so I apologize. January, February. This is the audit on the end of June 30th of 22. So we're actually talking about last year's audit. Everything went fine. The finding that you have in the audit is the same that you've had every year, and it just has to do with the lack of segregation of duties due to the small staff. You've got Linda pretty much doing everything with some compensating controls from mayor and council. So that is the finding that we had in the audit. The other recommendation that I would make, and one that I've been talking about, is maybe possibly it's time to look at upgrading software in the office. You're currently using QuickBooks desktop, and QuickBooks is kind of phasing out all of its desktop, going online. The online version is not as user-friendly, in my opinion, as the desktop, but with the fund accounting, and you all have a little bit more activity than you did, oh gosh, even 5 years ago. So the funds are getting to the point where it would make sense to start looking at that. So I would recommend just at least exploring that avenue. They're probably maybe even something a little bit more efficient when it comes to water bills and property tax bills where they're not having to be manually entered in the system. But just something to keep in mind going forward. And you've got the audit in the blue folder. I'm not gonna bore you by going through all of that, but you do have it. And if you have any questions, my number's on the front cover. But I wanted to go over the summary of the graphs that you should have in front of you as well. And this is just comparing the data in prior years. And we're first going to talk about government-wide. So we're talking about all funds here, all of your funds. So the total revenues government-wide for the year were just over $500,000. And you'll see the expenses there were about $564,000. If you look at the comparison from 18, you see 19 and 20 were pretty big revenue years. In 19, that was the donation of the Ranger House and the land by the DNR. And then in 20, Raven County's plus 19 receipts were included in that. So that's why that's a little skewed. But overall, if you take 19 and 20 out, you'll see that revenues, you're on trend, you're increasing, your expenses have increased too. Part of that 564 in expenses includes about 45,000 in legal fees for 22. So that's part of the increase in expenditures. But the revenue for 22 did increase by 4%. Expenses in comparison to 21 increased by 7%. And you'll see a summary of the years on page 4 past the graphing. And it also talks about in year 20 and the SPOS 19 receipts. So you'll see all that detail there. If you look at the history since 16 in your revenue, you can kind of see this kind of gives you a better idea when we talk about taking 19 and 20 out of that equation. And they'll, you can see in 16, the revenues were a little over 428,000 compared to 22 at 507,566. Same for expenses though, you do see that increase there, in 21, starting in 21, 22. On slide 7, these ratios here are just taking all of the charges for services. So this is taking your water, your licenses, your permits, your fines and forfeitures, and it's saying how much does that cover the total expenses government wide. So for 22, that was 33.5% of how much that's covered. Now that's really important, more so when we start looking at water. And I'll show you, you can see that on this next slide. In this graph, government-wide, you see that water makes up about 15% of your revenue. On the expense side, water is about 20% of your expenses. And of course, you know, taxes make up the bulk of it at 43% of your revenue. Then 23% are your charges for your general funds, charges for services like your fines and forfeitures, your license. And then you have your revenues, your intergovernmental revenues, your grants and your SPLOST that make up the other 19%. On the expense side, you have water at 20, your general government at 37% of expenses. Public safety together, between police and fire is 34%, and then your public works streets about 9% of your expenses. Any questions? Just some things to point out, some additional things to point out on page 9. The town remains very liquid. You have just under $1 million between the bank accounts and the CDs that you had at the end of 22. And I understand you've moved the CDs and you're getting a much better interest rate. So it's around 5% now. So that will, I expect to see that increase at the end of 23. You still continue to invest in your capital assets. Since 2018, you've had a 13% increase. As far as your improvements, you know, what you're spending on your capital assets, still no debt, which is very good. The largest portion of your net, when we talk about net position, that's your equity. And the largest portion of that reflects the investment that you're making in your capital assets. And then just over 650,000 is unrestricted, which means, you know, that's what you can use to meet your ongoing obligation. But any questions on that? Next, we're just looking at the general fund only. So this does not include the SPLOST accounts. This is just general fund. And you'll see the revenues in the general fund for just over 348,000, and the expenses were over 395,000 for the year. Revenues did decrease from 21. However, 21 included the sale of the Georgia Power building. So that is why that's so much higher, but they decreased by 35%, expenses increased by 21%. And then you can see the breakdown through the years on page 12, as far as the comparison. No surprise as far as what makes up the most revenue in the general fund, and that of course is taxes at 63%. And then, you know, your grants and your SPLOST at 7%, and 30% of that comes from fines and forfeitures and licenses and building permits. On the expense side of the general fund, 47% is general admin. Police is 37% of expenses, fire is 7%, and public works and streets are 10%. Since 2018, your property tax revenue has increased by 17%, you know, of course, due to assessments going up in fair market value. And then you can see that one of the things that you didn't have in 22 that you've had in years past was transfers to the water fund. So you guys are paying all those expenses out of that water fund, and you did not have any transfers over from general to water in 22. The average monthly expenses for the general fund were 32,943, and given the cash that was in the checking accounts at the end of 22, there's close to 13 months of liquidity in the general fund. Any questions? For the enterprise fund, the water total revenues in this were just under 75,000. Total expenses were a little over 114,000. And you see the increase there. Revenues actually increased by 16% compared to 21. And expenses also increased by 26%. On the capital ratio, 68%, just the higher the ratio, the more it suggests that you're investing in your capital assets and making the improvements. And then other highlights for water, water revenues have actually increased by 169% since 18. And you can see that increase on the graphing. Expenses have decreased by 11%. And of course, we talked about there were no transfers from the general fund for 22. Most of the water improvements that you've made have been funded by SPLOST. And then the average monthly expenses in this fund are 9,515. And given the cash at the end of the year, there's about 2 months of liquidity in that fund. Any questions at all for me? Okay, well, if you have any questions, my number's on there, and I thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for your time.
You're welcome. Okay. Oh, yeah, I guess you, yeah. Thank you. You too.
Right, there's no attorney report for this month. There's no old business, so we'll move on to our 2023 budget amendment, which we seem to have to do every year to have things change throughout the year. So Linda, walk us through that.
So the amendment encompasses everything that we've done throughout the year, approved, things you all have, changes you've made as we went, including, things like the settlement on the lawsuit, the DDA, 4,600 to the DDA for their, insurance, the generator repair, we amended SPLOST for the fire department, the survey that we did last month for the properties. And then we have some other things that just, general operating things. And we had quite a bit more of vehicle repairs than what was budgeted. That was kind of a big one, and everything else is, was pretty much on target. So if you look, there's the original budget for the general fund for revenues, and the amended budget, and then it's just got the change, whether it's more or less. We had quite a bit more fines and forfeitures than we had budgeted for the year. So our original budget, you remember, they were kind of down through COVID, and we were, trying to figure out where that number needed to be, but the original budget was at 100,500, and we're about the 145 mark. So that increased. We had a few things, permits, grants. We did not do a safety grant this year, which means we also didn't have that expenditure on the expense side, but on the revenue side, it was also a decrease. No change for legislative and executive, 32,195 for general administration increase. A lot of that's going to be attorney fees, but it also includes things like the survey. Some insurance, I think was higher. Municipal court, it was close, $900 additional. Police, 30,755 increase. Fire is the 3,000 less, that's the safety grant that would have been in their budget. So I was trying to bring that number down. Roads, no change, interfund transfer to the water department. Our, like Jelly said, in 22, we did not, move any money from general to water, although there was a loss in the water fund. If you remember looking at her chart, the expenses exceeded the revenues, but the water fund handled that for that year, but it can't. We only have 2 months of liquidity in that, so we can't keep taking out of the water fund, but so there's for the 23 budget, we had to increase, or it was 24,000 was the original budget, 32,300 is the amended budget for change of 8,300 increase. And then we moved the contingency money out. So total revenue, our total budget would be 467,250 for the general fund. So the pages that follow that is the detail on each department. So if you're wondering, what makes up those numbers, you can see whether we're plus or minus on the over budget. The legal fees, you can see where I crossed out 104, 107. That's because some of the legal fees were accounted for in the 22 years, but not paid until the 23 years. So that's why I just manually took those out so you can see what this year was actually. So those are all the detailed pages. Any questions on general fund? If you keep flipping, you'll get to the water fund. Charges for services were about 5,000 off on water revenues. So it's a decrease of 5,000, and then we did not have any new ones, so that service tax of 1,500 was not collected. So that increased, that's where we needed to increase then the transfer from the general fund. So that's there, that $8,300 difference. And then on the expense side, we were very close, got $1,950 more than what we budgeted. And then again, behind that is the detailed report and where those line items are. And your next special revenue fund is the hotel motel tax. There's no change. I don't think we're gonna need to change that. Now, if something crazy happens and we get a lot of extra hotel motel tax in the next month, I may have to come back to you in July, but it looks like we're on target for budget. And then the next special revenue funds are SWAS accounts. There was no change on the ARPA. I just included it, so I'll be there for reference. And then the next special revenue fund is the school zone camera fund. Of course, we did not have an original budget for that fund. We didn't have the cameras. And so there's the original budget was 0, and then the final budget is the numbers we've talked about before. The only difference being there's $7,000 in there for uniforms and gear for the new officer that wasn't in what we talked about previously. So and went in on budget workshops. 210,000 has been put in the city. So we've done that already. Mayor Early said that fire, that may not happen until next year, so we may have to end up moving that to next year's budget, the turnout gear numbers. So we can leave it in this, and if it happens, before the end of the year.
Is it because they're not available?
We just haven't had time to get someone, for turnout gear, you have to get sized. And the guy hasn't been able to get out here to size the members that need them. And the helmets, we haven't had the representative come out yet and talk to us. But turnout gear and helmets typically take several months to come in unless they happen to have them on the shelf. So even if they came out next week, we still might not see them until later.
That's this year's amended budget. Any questions?
All right, if there are no questions, I need a motion to amend the budget accordingly. Scott makes the motion, Tom seconds, all in favor? Unanimous? All right. We'll go ahead and move over to the budget, 2024 budget approval. I don't think there are any changes. Anything we need to talk about?
Yeah, there. Nothing changed from the last.
For the public hearing, so we need to get a motion to approve the 2024 budget. Scott makes it, Tom seconds, all in favor, unanimous. And then the last item on our agenda is the sign for the Lula Adventure. Yeah.
So, the previous sign that they had, so our ordinance allows for principal use sign of up to 100 square feet. Their previous sign, you remember, was kind of all one sign. They just had their different logos on it. And it was pushing right at that 100 square feet. If you take what they've submitted this time, it's actually 3 separate signs, but if you do the dimensions on each one of those signs, it actually adds up to 92.3 square feet. So oddly enough, square footage
Wow.
is smaller.
Wow.
Which was, and it does, which according to our ordinance, there's nothing saying that each one of those couldn't have 100 square foot sign, each business venture. It doesn't reference anything about stacking them or anything like that. It does limit the total height of the sign as 20 feet, and this is well under the 20 feet. Their original sign was a little over 8 foot. They've added an additional 2 foot sign to the top of it, that's a little adventure, so we're, between 10 and 11 feet total from the base.
What about the additional signage on the building itself?
That was approved with their original.
We've done that one.
Yeah.
Was there a complaint? Was there a complaint?
Well, I mean, no, there wasn't a
No.
complaint, but
I just,
when you substantially change the sign, you're supposed to get a sign permit, so.
And
I
they
reached
weren't-
out to them to see, I knew it changed, but I wasn't sure exactly, the extent of the changes, so they sent me everything. We corresponded back and forth, telling them they needed the permit and that's fine.
Yeah, because what's on the sign isn't really what we regulate, it's the sign itself, so changing the wording wouldn't have constituted a new application, but when he added that other sign, I actually split it up into 3 separate signs, it changed it. It turns out he didn't need it, and he should have come to us first, but.
And we had talked about it, he had called and asked, questions about what was allowed, but they just did not get the permit before they did it.
So. But it doesn't seem like there's anything to prevent approval of the sign, so. If there are any questions, we'll get a motion to approve. Tom makes a motion, Scott seconds, all in favor? Unanimous, all right. Mayor's comments. I need to get, Scott, you have some time after the meeting just to go over some stuff real quick? All right, I met with Georgia Rural Water today. Scott wasn't able to make it. They did find something that we need to look into. And I'm gonna get with Warren and go over it with him because it's in an area that we probably need to do some upgrading and update the system. Hopefully that'll help reduce some of that overage we've been seeing. And so we'll see. So it's helpful. But in the process of talking with him, he also mentioned that there is some software we can use to GIS software where we can start geolocating things, and the software is like $20 a month. So $240 a year, something we may want to talk about next month. And that's part of what I'm kind of want to talk to you about. And while Gary's here, we can go around and start finding things and locating them and getting them on that map. Because one of my concerns, like I was telling Linda the other day, we had to cut. There were stub outs, the last leak on over there. The stub outs were leaking, so we just turned them off at the main because they're going to lots that have never been developed. Well, someone does decide to develop in the future, they need to know that those valves are turned off at the main. So how do I document that? How do I get that information out for future? So it should be 20, 30 years from now. So we can put that on that GIS software. We can put notes. Everywhere we do something, we can tag something, put a note in there, and that just stays with it. So anytime someone pulls it up and looks at that map, they can see, hey, there's a pin here, what's going on? They can pull it up and look and say, oh, well, they did this repair on this day and whatever. And
It's an active map.
yeah, it'll be an active
Map database.
Yeah. So, and it's one that we can interact with ourselves. So it's something that is updatable.
So
So
did it show the lines themselves, so we have
Yeah,
a better idea of where the lines are?
that's, yeah, that would be the plan. And if we say right now, we think it's here, and then we go dig and it's 10 feet over here, we can go into the map and move that over. And correct it, and then put a note in there. Found it here, not here. So,
Great.
so I thought that was really neat. He said he is happy to come back out and even help us geolocate certain things. He can come out and with I forget what it's called, an imager basically, and go locate where the lines are underground with sonar, I think, something like that.
That would be something.
So that would be really helpful.
We'll do the whole system.
Yeah, well, I'll get as much of it done as I can, and with Gary here, I was sitting there talking to the guy, and Gary was with me. He started talking about all this, and I said, oh, that's interesting. I looked over at Gary, and he said, yep, I know, more homework. So yeah, we'll see if we can get some of that done. I don't want to take up all of his time on it. Some of it I can do just off the cuff, because I know at least enough of where things are. He also recommended that we have the meter for the state park tested. He gave me some contacts we can call, so I'll try to get some prices for that. And we're gonna see if Demorest has tested there since it's been installed, and if they haven't, we may want to get someone over. Because if their meter is reading wrong, that may be reading higher than what we're using. So we're still using more than we're charging for. And I don't know that we have that many leaks. So it could be a combination of items. So we're making progress. We're trying to narrow some of these things down. So
Have you had a chance to talk to Turpin yet about?
I did, thank you, I did. His response was, just let us look about life. He'd be happy to do it. He'd be happy to get one and sign it. But based on some original maps that I've got, that I've found recently for our water system, we do have an easement for where that water line's running already. That he signed over. I wasn't aware that where that map was, and I ran across it by accident. it's from this time when we were putting in that system in 1980. And it shows the line going across his property, so
A lot of it,
a lot of, I think it's 10 feet, I'm not sure, it's either 10 feet off the center line or it's 10 feet total.
Yeah.
I can't remember.
That's good to know. Wow.
Yeah, so, so we have it, I'll double check with Warren, make sure it's valid. And, then we can,
It's a big one.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, and there were some other, there are a bunch more easements that map is referenced in, that I've been questioning and curious about. So we now have those.
Anything up Hickory now?
No, we wouldn't have anything up there. No, that wasn't part of town yet. He did inform me that there's been a misunderstanding statewide, actually nationwide. The EPD has requested that we, not requested, demanded that we do an inventory of all of our water lines up to the foundation of each house. So even though it's past the meter, we gotta inventory it. And we gotta turn that in by October of next year. So
What's the purpose of that?
it's actually being referenced, and the reason there's confusion is it's being referenced as lead water lines or lead line infrastructure reporting. And everybody was thinking, well, we're just having to document any places we still have lead in our water systems. So I was ignoring a lot of the emails because I was thinking, we don't have any, no lead in our systems at all. Well, Tal, the gentleman from Georgia Rural Water, said that that's why they're trying to get word out. That's why they're trying to tell people, because everybody's been thinking about the same thing. And EPD wants to know everything. They want to know the size, what type it is. And so we're gonna have to start pulling that together too. Now we can take testimony. So talking to James about the water line that goes up Borgeview, since he was there when it's installed, all we have to do is document that he told us that that's what's there. We don't have to dig it up and get a photograph of it. That was my concern, was having to go around and dig up all these lines.
Yeah.
How do we prove it? So some we may have to, some we may, a lot of them we won't.
Is that some information we can also add to this new software
We
then?
can put it in GIS once you got it.
Yeah, I mean, we may as well. Well, if
Yeah,
if we're going that far for the EPD, we may as well. So we may come in with an amended budget to add $240 to, so I didn't want to do that tonight. I wanted to get more information pulled together, because I just learned about it today. And make sure, and see if there's any onboarding costs and expenses. Sometimes there are little hidden things that you don't know about right at first, so. So yeah, we've, main takeaway, we found a new leak. We're gonna get into it soon, and we've, got some direction to go on the water system, so. All right, that's about all I've got tonight. If we have any public comments, nobody online. Okay, well, we do not need executive session, so have a motion to adjourn. Tom makes a motion, Scott seconds, all in favor, unanimous. All right.
you like.
Thanks, London. So, yeah.
Are you headed over there?
I got call line.